Good evening from here in England and early morning in Australia to Peter Wilkinson, who was a medic corporal with one Indep, and he's going to give us his story about the things he saw and experienced. Welcome aboard, Pete. There's not so many guys coming forward to give their story these days. I don't know if they're camera shy or they feel that their stories are not worth sharing, but I do want to encourage people to please continue this series by coming forward and supporting us. So, Peter, nice to see you. I'm sitting here, well, in the dark, obviously, because it's 10 o'clock at night and 20 past 10, and you're about 20 past 8 in Australia.
Yeah, hi there, Tony. Yeah, good morning from Australia. And, maybe just, I'm actually going to try and talk a little bit about the small guys, because, we've heard about all the guys who are doing interesting stuff, but there are all the other people in support of that.
Yeah, but I think this channel, I've tried to diversify it more and more. I'm actively seeking farmers and women who worked in the WA and nurses and all that sort of stuff. So ladies, looking for talks from you. I think to kick off, as we do in every talk, is for you to tell us where you're born and raised and how you ended up in the army.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so I was born in Bulawayo and I went to Kamala Junior and Milton Senior School. And after school, it was still the days when you could go to university first. So I went to University of Pietermaritzburg. Took 4 years to do a 3-year course. And then the Rhodesian Army decided that they needed me. So I ended up in intake 160, which was in January 1978. And got to Llewellyn Barracks, and it was, because I'm a Bulawayo boy and living in Kamala, it was kind of down the road, really. And a lot of the officers, a lot of the kids from Llewellyn went to school with us, so we'd been out there riding horses and things as kids, so kind of knew the place. But it was very different when you go there as a national serviceman. I decided to go for Osby's in Gweru and went across there, got a hell of a good training, but I wasn't an officer, so I got sent back to unit, which was Llewellyn. And when I got there, I had a choice of either being a truck driver or a medic. And I thought, I hate changing tires on trucks, so I'll become a medic. And I guess life-changing, because it was, it wasn't something I'd really considered, but I mean, I've got a bit of a biological background from university and that, so it kind of made sense. I went to the medics training school in Llewellyn Barracks, which was really, really good. And it was just intense. I mean, we had, 3 or 4 months. The warrant officer in charge was a guy called Sir Huck. I can't recall his full name, but he was from the French Foreign Legion. I think he was German, and a really good trainer. And the training itself was excellent. We had some really, really good corporals, and it was intake 160, 161 that we sort of put together, plus a whole heap of other guys from engineers and SAS and a few other guys, and some Slew Scouts guys were on the course with us as well. So it was a fairly mixed crowd, which was actually pretty good. Once we passed out, we were deployed all over the country, and being medics, we get distracted, by people lying on the ground. So quite a few of the guys with us got injured in the first couple of weeks of getting out there, and very sadly, a really good guy called Peter Rice got killed very shortly after we were deployed. Roger was one of our guys, and I were sent up to Victoria Falls to go and join, one Indep. And we traveled up by a day train, which was really cool, because we went through game reserve during the day, and we saw elephants and a whole heap of stuff. So, and as kids, we used to go to Wanky quite often, so it was really great. And because of the war, we weren't really getting in there much. And so we ended up in one Indep. I think it had just become RAR at that stage in Victoria Falls. Don Price was the officer in charge. Neil Jackson was the 2IC. And so we kind of settled in there. Most of the guys were pretty welcoming. There were a couple of guys who weren't hell of a welcoming, but that's life. And one of the guys who I befriended almost immediately was a guy called Vic Nair. And he was a corporal. I think he came from Harare. And shortly after we arrived, Vic and one of the subalterns decided to swim across the Zambesi to go and set up some ordnance. I don't know what the heck they were trying to do, but they swam across, and halfway across, from Vic's point, it wasn't halfway. Vic shouted out, I can't swim, and it was the last we ever saw of it. So presumably taken by a crocodile, which was, crazy. And I think Don Price and a couple of the guys went up in a helicopter the next morning to have a look. And I think they counted 17 crocodiles that were big enough to take the guy. So Tony, you know that part of the world. I mean, it was pretty madness, but it sort of gave an idea of the sort of the bravado of the guys. You know, they would do some pretty silly things, but also hell of a brave. Eh? So,
did you have a subby called Ian Gates at all?
I can't remember the name, but I don't. I think he had just left or was in the process of leaving when I got up there, but I don't remember the guy that far.
Right.
And I certainly wouldn't picture him. So Tony, we went there a hell of a long time before we basically were told to move to Beitbridge. And but before that, just a couple of stories. One was that we were, the sergeant and myself were actually sent to Kazungula to go and do an OP and to support what Don Price called the hit squad, which were looking for some combatants who were coming down from Zambia, crossing into Botswana over the ferry, and infiltrating back into Zimbabwe. And so we were there doing an OP on the ferry, and we were told to keep hell of a quiet because I think some guys before us, and I think that you were probably fully responsible for this, had started a huddle with the Zambians. And we were told to keep our heads down, that we weren't allowed to light fires, and we weren't allowed, if we fired around, it was going to be responded to by some pretty heavy stuff from Zambia because they were kind of sensitive about their area. And the first night we sort of, divvied up, and some lion came to visit us, and the next morning they'd been up within about, 6 meters of us, and making us sort of like, ooh, 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 sort of stuff. And I was thinking, I just hope I have my rifle and automatic. And I hope the guy behind me gets it before I do. That'll give me a chance to save his life rather than him save my life. And the next night we slept in the Unimog, and an elephant put its trunk in and fell to us. So it was pretty wild out there. And yeah, it was kind of interesting.
Did you see anything come across the river or observe anything at that point?
There were trucks, but in actual fact, Tony, we had guys who were actually right on the river with the binoculars. We were sort of like to spot. I was a medic and had a sergeant with me to sort of spot. We weren't actually doing the OPs, but I believe those guys were sort of counting people on the trucks. And we had guys down the drag in Botswana who were also counting people. One of the things that did come about from that was that on one occasion the BDF, Botswana Defence Force, decided to do a hot pursuit, and it was not an intelligent thing to do. They came into Rhodesia, and one Indep took them out, and they loaded these guys up. The Botswana Defence Force, obviously they were a friendly country, so they loaded these guys up and took them to Kazungula border post and chucked them off the truck very undignifiedly. And the Botswanans were rightly very offended by that. But an interesting thing is, I was in Gaborone about 8 weeks ago maybe, and I came across the shrine, and there were these guys mentioned on the shrine, and they're killed by Rhodesian Defence Force.
Wow.
And it's kind of sad, you think these are kids, these are guys who had families and friends and mums and dads, and they made a hell of a lot different to us. And just by maladventure they got involved, and if they'd actually just not been so brave, they'd still be alive today, maybe.
Well, who are they actually following into Rhodesia? Do you know?
Yes.
Sorry, tours?
No, us.
Oh, right. Okay, so they'd seen you operating over there, and then came across.
So they thought we can, Rhodesians can do a hot pursuit into Botswana. They'll do a hot pursuit into Rhodesia.
Yeah.
Silly idea.
Wow. Yeah, that is unfortunate for them.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And Tony, also in your talk, you often mentioned things like mortaring, and we got mortared by the Zambians. and I don't know, one occasion I do remember, which was like you could hear, obviously you hear the bombs going off when they got put down the tubes, and then they sort of came over, and you could hear them coming along. And I decided I'd better jump into the bunker because I'd been told to do it before, and I got to the bunker and it was just full of people. So I'll just sort of lie low and see how that all goes. But they'd actually set the bombs with the fuse to go through buildings, and it was actually raining in Victoria Falls, and as these bombs hit the ground, they just buried in the ground. They were just going boop. They're like a very sullen, very sad noise, but did very little damage. I mean, if they'd hit you, obviously it would have been quite bad news. But they largely fell sort of harmless on the ground.
So was that back in the police camp?
We were in, I don't know if it was a police camp. Yeah, I think it was. But it's sort of, sort of Peter's Motel was further out of town. We were closer to town. Yes, Fraser.
Oh, right.
Near the old airport.
Oh, right.
And we were we were within walking distance of the pubs and the casino.
Yeah.
So we were well situated. You know,
They
wow,
love their mortar bombs. They love their mortar bombs there, didn't they? But
yeah.
Zambia.
And I'd actually been up there as a civilian. We got mortared as well. On another occasion, we were actually in Victoria Falls Hotel Garden, and there's an old tree there. I don't think it's a big tree, it's something else, but that got hit by a bomb fairly close to us. And tell you, in my army days, I was a bit of a thief. I stole a bottle of white horse from the bar, and one of the waiters and I loaded the stitch, and we drank the bottle, and it fairly ratty that particular night, right that night. Tell you one thing that
we
was
all
kind of
did that, yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, I've heard. And thankfully, those days are over for me. So one thing that actually was really interesting is that I got lent to the Grey Scouts at the airport, the current airport.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, they hadn't built a new runway yet. And so they didn't have a medic, so I was lent to them for 10 days or 14 days or so. And so I ended up doing some sort of horse work as well, which gave me you have this sort of love-hate relationship with horse. It sort of built up the hate relationship quite strongly.
Yeah.
Because these things bloody kick and bite, and they're not hell of a friendly, when you just try to help, and they didn't see it that way. But tell you one thing that really has been in my mind for all my life is that the guys used to clear the runway every day, and they'd go down to the end and come back and check around. And one night they picked up these tubes. One afternoon they picked up these tubes from Strela 2s for anti-air missiles. And obviously these guys had been there, and obviously they tried to shoot down some planes. And we brought them back, and I do remember Don Price was, I think he might have had a look at them at some stage, but before that, we obviously had the Grey Scouts CEOs and they'd have a look at them. Didn't kind of figure out what they were. But the thing that kind of bothers me is that was kind of, preceded the Viscounts getting taken down. And I just wonder, I've always wondered, did we actually do enough? I mean, I was a corporal, I wasn't in charge, but did we really warn the guys back in Harare that maybe, this was likely to happen? Or were we thinking, these guys have tried a few times to take out planes and it's obviously not working, so let them carry on trying. But I mean, ultimately they got it right. And so I don't know whether we would have been any different if we had passed that information forward, or if that information was passed forward. I have no idea. But it does kind of worry me about that.
At the end of the day, what could we really have done to stop SAM 7s hitting aircraft? We didn't have the technology. It was a vast expanse of land around any airport. We couldn't have covered it. Really, we did try eventually after the two Viscounts to put on anti-heat paint and drop the exhaust pipe down. You might remember those cartoons where the Viscount exhausts were dragging on the ground a week after they'd taken off. But what can you do to counter that? It was just by the grace of God, really, that an aircraft wasn't shot down at Vic Falls, because a lot of tourists came in that way.
Sure. I mean, I agree with that, Tony, but I mean, we could have actually said, well, we're not flying the Viscounts into Victoria Falls or Kariba anymore, or let's if we really need these tourists, let's put some more treepies out there. So if these guys try to do it, we take them off. But I don't have the solution. It's just one of these things that and it's if we could, if we had, if we would, we didn't. And
I flew that very route from Vic Falls to Kariba to Salisbury a week before I went home on R&R. And so if it had been a week later, I possibly would have been one of the victims. And but it turned into be a wonderful experience for me, actually, not making light of a horrific shooting down of aircraft. But I met some South African tourist advisor girls that were looking after looking at all the hotels that Rhodesia had to offer. And so they adopted me for the weekend. It was very nice, but not making light of the terrible events with the two Viscounts. That was dreadful.
It was, and unforgivable. One of the things in the war that our buddies getting wiped out is one thing, but to do that sort of thing it's not on.
No.
Anyway, Victoria Falls was a pretty idyllic sort of setting. One other thing that happened to us was that there was a guy called Lolly, I can't remember his surname, he used to drive the bookie, and he and I went to this casino one night, and we had a heck of a good night. And I'd actually dropped a chip on the floor, and I was drunk, and I picked the chip up and put it on a number on roulette, and it came up, and I was too drunk to take it off, and it came up the second time. So Lolly and I were cash rich for a while. Problem was, we'd actually checked in our rifles. Well, I checked in my rifle, he checked in his Uzi when we arrived. And when we came to leave, that Uzi was nowhere to be found. So someone had bloody stolen it.
Oh,
And Tony, the inquiries, the guys from Brady Barracks were not happy. They looked at it, it was being entirely our fault. And we were saying, no, we weren't drunk, we didn't. I thought there was no recollection.
yeah.
Actually, never found that Uzi, and absolutely amazingly, the guys believed our story. We couldn't be bothered to really get into too many details. So that was actually quite a bad thing to happen. But anyway, we then moved on. We all got moved on from Victoria Falls to Beitbridge, and the idyllic situation changed immediately. We were given this sort of decomposed granite outcrop of rock. Had a standpipe with some water in it, and had electricity. So we had quite a lot of that is about our luxury. And Roger, Luke and I were still together. Roger and I managed to acquire this big tent from the South Africans, because we were working very closely with the South Africans when the South Africans were popping across a lot. And we set up this medics tent out there. The staff sergeant that we were working with Victoria Falls managed to stay in Victoria Falls. So Roger and I were sort of left by ourselves. And we set up this tent, and we had a sort of a caution, had an area at the back where we were able to sleep, but we actually got some beds. So we were pretty well set up, and we had set up a tent where we had offered medical services to the guys there. One of the things that actually came down to Beitbridge to help us was a mobile surgical unit, which was this big caravan. This was, was accompanied by a doctor and a couple of staff. There was a Corporal Nick Ridley who came down with it, and Nick and I ended up as lifelong friends. And we had guys like Dr. Gary Ferguson, if anyone remembers him from Bulawayo, and a guy called Ralph Kitcat, who I think was actually a Matori boy, and a young kid called Barry Saldi, no longer a great young kid, came to help us. And there was a guy driving the truck called Albert. And basically the idea of the MSU is that it was very, very much hotter in Beitbridge than it was in Victoria Falls. And so my day would typically be I'd go and have a shower before it got light, and showering in the dark because I didn't want to get taken out, and shaved in the dark. And then you'd hear that most mornings, quite frequently in the mornings, you'd hear that sort of whine of those helicopters starting up, and you think, okay, that's cool. Nick was attached to the MSU. Roger had been posted to Brady Barracks, I think. So Nick used to run the sick parade while I went out, and I'd fetch guys, normally keeps or protected villages which had been revved during the night. And we'd bring in people who'd been sort of shot up there. And I've got a diary, and I'll read a few entries from that. I won't bore people too much. Nick and I, as I say, Nick did the sick parades, and I would go out and fetch guys, and then Nick would have the MSU set up with Barry Southey and whatever doctor was there. And when we brought these people in, it could be a relatively minor thing, or it could be anything from there to someone who'd been killed. But if they were killed, we just obviously just take them straight to the morgue. We had Fire Force with us frequently, and obviously the Alouette helicopters, the French-made Alouette helicopters. And I think, Tony, a lot of guys have spoken about it, but essentially it was a squadron of four aircraft, which one had a 20mm cannon, which was pretty mean, horrible thing with a sort of multiple exploding warhead and a ball in it as well. And that talked to people. And the others either had, I think, twin Brownings. I think there were 3.0s, not 303s, or 4 Brownings. And we had, I think, we sort of transitioned from Rhodesian helicopters through to South African ones. One of the Rhodesian helicopters, which had a big cross on the side of it, which was the camouflage, was, I think, one of the oldest Alouettes in terms of ours that Alouette had ever had.
Wow.
So this whole thing, but it's like George Washington's axe, they change the engine frequently. But the actual wheels are probably the same. And then the South African guys arrived with their helicopters once political things started changing. And their helicopters, I used to think, although Mimi and Beaver can sort of confirm this, had doors on them. And I think they might have only had a twin Browning. I can't recall. Hope he started using the South African helicopters quite a lot as well. And the big difference also is that the Rhodesian pilots looked after their helicopters incredibly well, whereas the South Africans would play around a bit and show us they could go the whole way down the runway on one wheel and then you could actually turn the helicopter a little bit more than 180 degrees. And we didn't have belts on, so we actually stayed in with things. So we played around a little bit. So that is quite cool. Tony, just an interesting thing, and I mean interesting if you're a doctor and a medic, is that we had hell of a high levels of venereal disease, and also interestingly, everyone sort of immediately thinks, oh, well, that's African soldiers. It wasn't only the African guys; quite a few of the other guys got it as well. One of the things we were supposed to do was actually charge guys who got PED, and Nick and I were hell of a busy, so we decided that was too difficult. And anyway, kind of discouraged guys. So all that had happened is when guys couldn't actually feel the pain anymore, they'd come in. And so we decided we would actually prove everyone in the world wrong, and that we would actually not charge them, but we would actually solve their problems and counsel them. And I said to Nick, hey Nick, we need condoms. So he said, sure, let's order some. So I ordered several thousand, and Nick ordered several thousand because he thought let's was us, and I thought it was in me. So we ended up with 20,000 condoms or something. We're flush, Tony, lots of these things. And we try to hand them out for anyone who wanted them. That was cool. But anyway, as the time progressed, we slowly whittled down the queue to almost no one until there was actually just one guy, and he was a hell of a nice guy, hell of a friendly, as you can tell. And I do remember his name, but that's not going to be mentioned now. But we just built an airstrip out of town a bit, and so we managed to get him to be a guard out there, so he couldn't come to town. And I'd actually travel out to go and give him his injection every morning. And ultimately, we cured him. And for a week, we were free of ED. It was actually like, what are we going to do today, Nick? Or, thankfully there's a Casevac, because there's nothing else to do. And so for 1 week, and we could only congratulate each other because we were basically broken protocol, so we couldn't really tell anyone else. But it was pretty cool. And then we had the Musgrave elections came along, and Puma Ravana came through our camp, and we were asked to look at them. Jeepers. I think without exception, they had something wrong with them, and they were not cooperative, and we didn't have the penicillin. So we just basically gave up on them and just concentrated on our own guys. Tell you one really, really interesting thing that happened with us is that we started capturing guys, Zanu combatants. And quite a few of them, about a dozen maybe, actually ended up on our side. And because we had Casevac then, we had sort of categories of Casevacs. You had sort of, civilians, and we had soldiers. Obviously, we looked after incredibly well. But when we got one of those guys, we weren't really allowed to Casevac them any further than MSU. So we keep them. And because we kept them, they became our buddies. And it was actually really interesting dealing with these guys. I have absolutely no idea why they were motivated to come into Rhodesia. I know that a lot of people are going to be cross with you for saying this, but these guys were brave. I mean, to think that they were sitting somewhere in Mozambique and they decided, let's pop across to Rhodesia, where there's fire force and those guys are going to bloody kill us, and we're not going to have water, and we've got to go and find food ourselves, and that takes a lot of guts, and they were pretty certain what the outcome was going to be, and yet they kept coming and kept coming. When I spoke to them, I couldn't see any indoctrination. Why are you guys in the army? We like being in the army, but why? Well, they're like, well, why didn't you join our? Now you are. And also, so they'd sort of pop into the coke with us when they could and when we had time. Nick also set up a couple of volleyball teams, and he had this. One of the teams was these guys, and we used to invite the South African police and the South African Army across to come and play volleyball. And actually, ultimately, we actually had a South African company in our camp, and these South Africans were just like, you guys, who are these guys? I would say, former combatants, and they'd say, you're kidding, I said, no. I said, well, do you trust them? Said, well, what do you think? They're pretty good at volleyball. We tend to win, so yeah, we trust them. And also interestingly, after I left the army, they used to come visit me at home. And my wife used to say, who are those guys? And I'd say, terrorists. And she said, no, seriously. I said, yeah, okay. It's just guys I was in the army with. And then, slowly they got lives and they kind of disappeared. So, yeah, Tony, if I can press on, I've actually got not a hell of a lot, but about a page and a bit of diary entries
Yeah.
If it's okay, I'll just go through those and
Yeah,
people
please.
might just remember.
Yeah.
I'll mention a few names as well. I didn't keep the diary ever diligently. We were pretty busy, and I did it when I could. So, on the 22nd of November '78, an African male adult from Rhodesia Railways stood on and detonated an anti-personnel mine. A European male adult from Rhodesia Railways, and this was actually a guy called Ray Tink, who was from my year at school in Norton. Ran to his assistant, and he had his leg taken off as well. And really sad for Ray. Sad for both. A couple of other African male adults were hit by shrapnel.
Before you move on from them losing their legs, you actually responded to that scene?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what you did, how you coped with it? I mean, what was going through your head? I mean, it's pretty shocking to see that. And, are you doubting your training? Did you have difficulty getting your needle into their arms? Just walk us through that a little bit, Pete.
Tony, the answer is no, not really, because basically by the time we got there, those guys had medical training and they'd sorted it all out. So we were I was an uplift. So I think we actually did that by road. So I got there, they'd been bandaged and everything, they'd had morphine put on, they had the thing stuck in their forehead, and they had a drip set up already. So we kind of loaded them up, gave them reassurance, and I think on that occasion we took them through the MSU. We had a look, we checked them out, the doctor had a look at them, and we decided how we'd actually evacuate them and where they'd be sent to. In the case of Ray, my folks had a house which was across the Selwyn Avenue, so we were fairly close to Bulawayo Hospital. And when I went to R&R, I sort of went to go and see Ray, and I was going to try and break him out and take him to the Red Baron, and get him pissed. But the nurse was sort of opposed to that, and I regret that, But Tony, in terms of our medic training, most of it actually the guys were pretty good on the ground. We, if we had to put in a drip, we would, but mostly the guys had already been stabilized. So and invariably when you put guys in a helicopter, that the drip tissued anyway, so you had to re-put it in by the time you got there. But again, we had a professional doctor who was much better at that than us, and just took over and did that. Mm-hmm. And we'd actually decide where to send them to. The three places we sent them to was either Messina, which was fairly often, either by road or helicopter, or to Bulawayo, and sometimes to Salisbury, Harare. On one occasion, we took guys to Cherezi, because that's where the choppers had to go back to. There was 5 force down at Cherezi, so choppers came and fetched them, took them back to Cherezi Hospital. But the training was hell of a good. But as I say, we actually generally didn't really. The guys on the ground had generally done most of what should have been done. We just checked it through, made sure that the documentation was okay, and put the drip back if it had to go back. We always carried extra morphine and extra drips and things like that in our packs. So yeah, and we won.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so 10th of December, an African male juvenile and one African female juvenile were injured in a Cornside village. So our guys had actually moved to a village, and these guys have been hit in crossfire. They were brought in to us by South African helicopters at 11:40 in the morning. Again, they'd had dressings and painkillers administered already and antibiotics. So we took them to the MSU. The AFJ sustained a gunshot wound on his right forearm, and we sewed him up, gave him more antibiotics. The bloke, the AMJ, was badly injured, sustaining a gunshot wound to the left knee and one on the right buttock. And there was a laceration about 10 centimeters long, horizontally, and about 6 or 7 centimeters deep. Tony, one of the things as an aside here was that there was a heck of a big difference between being shot with an AK and shot with an FM. Mm. And FNs just were like a buzzsaw. If you get hit by an FN, you knew. It was normally. In fact, this guy was very lucky that he didn't get killed by the shock. Actually, not shock as in loss of blood, but just the shock of being hit by an FN bullet would bloody take you out. Yeah. Whereas AKs made a nice, neat little hole. Anyway, they amputated his leg under general anaesthetic, and we gave him some ringers of lactate. He recovered, and they were taken to the African clinic and transported to Binga hospital the next day by road. Next one was on the 19th of January, 79, a South African Defence Force Land Rover rolled over on the main road outside Beitbridge and threw 4 national servicemen out. 2 were hurt, so you just kind of wonder about the 2 who were hurt. tough guys. Out of a Land Rover, you don't get hurt, but that's okay.
Yeah.
One landed on his back and was winded, and the other guy had a cut in his head. At the same time, one of our police reservists up at the police camp, they're the guys who used to run the convoys, slipped as he walked, as he climbed a watchtower, broke his ankle. And my mate Nick made a note in my diary saying, actually, the guy had slipped, he basically gave me a story. Nick reckons that this guy had actually walked out of the pub blind, drunk, and broken his leg, and came up with a story. He was climbing the watchtower, but heck, we were certainly in no position to judge them.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nick sorted out the guy with the broken ankle, and a guy called Ron Grant, who was an Air Force medic, and I sorted out the South African guys. And we took the whole lot to Messina Hospital in South Africa. Another sort of aside there, Tony, when we used to go across to Messina quite often, and quite often we go across in helicopters and get left there with the casualty, and then we had to find our own way back, because obviously the helicopter wasn't going to wait for us.
Mm.
And we'd hitchhike. Just literally stand on the road and put your thumb up, and someone would say, are you going anywhere? You say, I need to get back to Rhodesia. And interestingly, going through the customs and immigration, the South Africans were actually quite keen to get rid of us. So, when you presented a passport, they'd say, not our problem. But the Rhodesians used to quite often give us grief. Where's your passport? So actually, I don't often carry it in the bush, eh? And on one occasion, I just said, well, fine, I've got a rat pack. I can sleep on the floor here. I'll be happy. And I just camped on the floor until the guy just told me to bugger off. And it was kind of a weird relationship. But on the other hand, if we came through with an ambulance with the lights flashing, that always let us through. And Messina Hospital was always very welcoming. The South Africans looked after us incredibly well. And another kind of funny thing that happened at Messina Hospital, we had a guy called Albert who was an RDR driving our truck. And this guy came across to us driving the ambulance, and I think I was in the back maybe with Nick. And when we got to Messina Hospital, the guys there sort of took our casualty off us and said, hey, do you guys want some breakfast? So I said, yeah, knackers, absolutely. Thanks, what do you guys got? And so we sat there and we were eating, and I said, where's Albert? And we looked out the window, and Albert had actually been given half a loaf of bread and a tin mug of very hot tea. And because he was a coloured guy, he had to go and sit in the garden. It was like, jeepers, this is like, it was a bit of a surprise to us. But I would go back at the vehicle. He was quite offended, which is understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just like us, and there's no reason to treat him differently.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is what it is, eh?
Mm.
So another one which was very sad was a guy called Corporal Richard Sanderson Smith, who was from 2RR, and he was shot in the side, and it took out his kidney and perforated his intestine and stomach. And Rich was actually a really good guy. He was in a hell of a lot of pain, and I got the impression that he was actually a lot better than he was. And we had a really, really nice lady in the post office called Dorothy Dot. I think her name was Ramsey. And so she organized that this guy phoned his wife, and he had a chat to his wife. And we sent him off to Harare, where he came from. But on the April the 19th, 1979, he passed away. And I'm very sad about that.
And Pete, you actually were the first respondent to that event, were you?
I think he was brought in. I think I wasn't the first respondent. Obviously his call sign heads were the first respondent.
Mm.
So I would have gone out to the bush to go and pick the guy up.
And so he was set in the side in an ambush or in a contact?
It would have been an ambush, yeah.
In an ambush. And he was
2RR operating to the east of us.
Yeah, that's where I operated in 2RR. And so that's very sad. And so he
I think John Bissett might have been the major, I'm not sure.
Bissett, yes, he was my major, A company too.
Was he really? John and I were big mates after all this stuff. John and I worked together for different companies, but together.
Yes.
And he's actually, before he passed away, he was the godparent of one of my children.
That's interesting. He was into agricultural stuff or something, if I remember.
Yeah, so am I.
Right.
He worked for agriculture in Harare. He used to work for government. He did a hell of an interesting thesis on hippos up out of somewhere in Priva.
Right.
And basically they invaded his research station and burnt everything, and all his data was lost.
Shame.
So he never finished his PhD. But hey, he was one of the most interesting guys in the world.
Yeah.
Very, very good guy.
Yes.
So the last one I'm going to read out is one that's probably one of the saddest, because on the 1st of the 679, I was caught at Kazavak and Mzunga Ranch headquarters. We waited at the farm across the road at John Brown's for some time. waiting for news. And again, Tony, I wasn't the first responder. They were bringing guys in. We knew that there were 2 casualties. Didn't know who they were. But then we found out through the Agric alert that Jerry Gazet had been hurt. And when we asked the guys, for a sort of update, is he okay? They said no. And unfortunately, his wife Jan heard that, and she obviously started very, very panicky and very, very upset about it. We crossed the road, used a different channel, and found out that Jerry had in fact been hit and killed. And as she was dead, that there was a militia that was wounded, and also they had a dead combatant. Anyway, they were bringing these guys in, and when they arrived, we had quite a problem getting a plane to fly the guys off. So we were trying Beitbridge to start with. And while we were doing that, I'll just talk to this rather than read it, but while we were doing that, waiting for the plane, we borrowed Carol Brown's makeup, and she helped make Jerry up because Jan wanted to view the body. And we also had a bottle of whiskey, so we got a little bit drunk, but I still had to do the Casbah. And I think, Teddy, why this actually made a difference is that it's the first time, up until then, you saw casualties and we saw a lot of guys being killed, but this was the first time that actually I'd seen the civilian side of it. Actually, poor Jan, she was a very nice person, and she had to put up with this. And you just think how brave those women were. They were actually out in the Zinga Ranch, and their husbands were out in the bush trying to do something, trying to make a living, trying to keep things ticking on.
Yeah.
And suddenly, it's all over. And anyway, we loaded these. We got a plane from Jock Wanda eventually, and we loaded them up. The plane was a bit small for what we had to do, and I actually regret to have to admit I actually sat on Jerry because there's no other room for me to sit on the plane, and flew them down to Bulawayo.
And so how was he killed? You say he was a civilian.
Was shot in the chest, I think.
And they attacked his farm, or he was?
No, they were out on patrol.
Right. Okay.
Or on patrol. I think they'd actually heard there was an incident, something going down at the dip tanks or something. They went to go and investigate.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
We flew into Brady Barracks, and for some curious reason, I remember the guy's name. There was a Lieutenant Jimmy King who met us, and he said to me, "Is there anything I can do?" And I said, "Oh, geez, I need a Coke. I'm feeling a little dehydrated." So anyway, we took the militia to Impilo Hospital and dropped Jerry off at Bulawayo Morgue. But yeah, pretty awful. And as I said, it was the first time I'd actually really interacted with civilians being affected. And it was traumatic. It wasn't suddenly, a whole lot of dead guys lying outside the tent. It was one of the things that also happened there is they found a tongue in the area of the horn door, and none of the people present had lost a tongue. So some other poor guy had his face shot away, and that would have not made it. The poor pilot on that occasion was Warwick Norval, and Warwick was I don't know if any of you guys have come across Warwick, but he was a magnificent pilot. And one of the things that happened was that Zana used to use donkeys for transporting their equipment. So we shot donkeys in huge numbers. And because of that, we had vultures and marabou storks and things like that floating around. And on one occasion, Warwick was flying and he hit a marabou stork. And I mean, it was a hell of a clunker. You don't want to hit a bloody marabou stork in a large aircraft. And it pushed the wing back about a meter, but also all the little aeroplane, what they call those little pulleys and things, we couldn't actually drop the flaps on the plane. So we had to land on this really, really terrible runway, just using the tails. And Warwick put the plane down. I mean, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And he did a magnificent job, so he landed that. Anyway, so basically, when we got out, we were all sort of shaken, and I said, "Warwick, here's a present for you," and there was a marabou stork. So I took out the marabou stork, and very sadly, there was a car behind the marabou stork, so I killed the car at the same time. Unintended consequence, but anyway, that happened. Yeah. So, Tony, that was sort of Beitbridge, and then, that all sort of started winding up. And, just a couple of things that I'd like to mention. We had Mimi Kaywood, who was 303 on the radio, and she and her family were absolutely magnificent to us. Dot, I've mentioned already at the post office, she used to, I don't know if she took the PTC, but certainly when I phoned home, the phone calls were hell of a cheap. And then there's a lady called Janet Richardson, who was a policewoman there. And her old man had he owned Todd's Motel down the West Neck. We had a wild child called Lee Caddison, and basically kids. Hey, these guys were young kids. Another guy called Peter DeBarris, and another guy called Rhodesia. I can't remember Rhodesia's surname first name. But these guys were pretty wild, and you know, Tony, they were straight out of school. They shouldn't have been out of school. These days would be bloody child abuse. And those kids picked up a rifle and went into the bush. And you know, I don't care about the heroes. I don't care about, you know, Don Price. Yeah, he's a hero. But these guys were heroes. So they were young and they had their entire lives ahead of them, and they weren't professional soldiers. They were just troopies, and they did a magnificent job. And other guys like Ron Fisher and people like that were really great as well. But they were, you know, they're a little bit more mature. Just a few stories I've come up with. Nick and I were given some warthogs. They'd actually done a walk through a school one time and picked up some baby warthogs. And of course, because we were medics, we had to look after warthogs. And these two warthogs lived with Nick and myself, and we fed them. And then we'd give them breakfast, and they'd wander up to the police camp. And the police guys thought they belonged to them as well, and the warthogs had no problem with that. So they had a second breakfast up at the police camp. So that was pretty cool. On one occasion, Neil Jackson was sitting on the long drop, reading the Bulwark record, and had after sorting times or something. And the helicopters came, and one of these South African guys said, "Hey, you know, check, there's Neil on the toilet." So they hovered the helicopter over, you know, and his newspaper went, and the toilet paper went, and the Hessian went. And Neil was in an undignified situation. He sat there and he didn't know what to do, you know, and he tried to shout at us, you know, and we couldn't hear. It was a lot of noise. But anyway, and shortly after that, they actually managed to bloody bring one of their helicopters. They left the propeller, the blade over the exhaust, and they had one of those, when you mentioned Strellas, they had an upward blast, and this blast sort of melted and didn't melt, but made the thing tacky, and as it came around, it smacked the fuselage. So the Cyclones took out one of their own helicopters. And then probably the last another story was a guy called Keith Alford, who was a subaltern. He and I were at university together, and one night in spite of our rank differential, we decided to go and get pissed, and got horribly blind drunk. And about 2 a.m, we came back and we decided that hunger pains were taking over. So, and I don't have Keith's permission to mention the story. So 100% it's my fault, Keith. I broke off all the locks in the fridges, and I stole the ham, and I cut it up, and I fed you, Keith. And we had a Sergeant Kurt, who was our cook sergeant, and you know, he was livid. He was beyond cross. So Keith and I went across to South Africa, borrowed a pop rivet, and fixed everything up. But Sergeant Kurt was not appeased, so he told Don Price. Anyway, Don told me I was a bloody convict, which was probably correct. But he gave, you know, Keith's rank took the full brunt of this. Don was not happy with Keith, and so Keith brought a little brunt of that. But you know, he survived. Anyway, so as time goes on, the pressure brought to bear on the South Africans got us to come up with some sort of political cutouts for Zimbabwe and Rhodesians. To come up with a political settlement, we obviously Rhodesia complied, and from then on, we had a company of South African soldiers in camp with us. And so suddenly things changed. You'd sort of, you know, be sitting there or walking along the camp. Some guy would sort of brace up to you, you know, so you know, look around like, you know, like that great scene, and the guys must be crazy when I start running away, you know. And you kind of wonder who the hell this guy's bracing up to. But they're bracing up to us. And we'd say, "Hey, you know, you like a cup of tea?" And they say, "Oh, cool, we'll make it go." And just, you know, just calm down. You know, this is a war. We're not in training anymore. Hey, this is just relax, eh? We'll get by. But there were differences. We had from Cape Town, we had the Cape Town Rifles, the Dukes, and they were territorial, so they were sort of older blokes. And they would actually put on civvies and get on the Bulwark convoy and go and get fired up at night time, and they come out in the morning convoy. So they were having quite a good time. We also had some guys, the Tempe Tigers, I think they were 44 Parabat from Wilkinson, and they must have had a terrible training here, because they were very, very formal, and they never really calmed down. And then I was at Natal University, so we had the Natal Carbineers come through as well. And they were basically buddies of mine from university, so that was pretty cool. And we had a good time with them. And when they had the elections, there was a rare election. Some of these guys actually borrowed our uniforms and went and voted illegally. So so anyway, that sort of got us into this last stage of Beitbridge, which is we were a hell of a short of medics, so I stayed behind, didn't go on R&R for a couple of times. My hair became quite shaggy, and because I couldn't get a haircut. And then just towards the end of my national service, about a week before, Nick and actually quite a few of the other guys, Nick and Tom Bull and a couple of guys, had got off early from their national service to go and become doctors. So they'd actually gone off to University of Rhodesia. And so Nick had actually got hold of me and said, hey, we've got the boat, we're going to go water skiing on Lake McIlwain, do you want to come? So, I'm kind of in the army, eh? And so I went to Don and I said, Don, I've missed a couple of R&Rs. Do you mind if I leave the army a week early? And he said, yeah, sure, And he said some hell of nice things, which made me realize that, perhaps I'd been forgiven for raiding the fridge. And so that was that portion of my national service. I was due to go back to do a postgrad degree at University of Natal, but for Christmas of that year, I did a call up at Masuna Mouth, which is where the Zambesi River stops flowing into Kariba, and the Masuna River joins the Zambesi.
Before we go on to that, Pete, I believe, first of all, I'd love to talk to Mimi. I'd love to interview her. I don't know how many people have praised her, and we've tried like crazy to get hold of her. So if you know her or have any influence over it would be wonderful. But the southern...
just a point there. Hey, no one has influence on Mimi.
Okay,
I could ask her kindly.
I've heard that.
But Tony, you're on your own. You're going to have to beg and bow and bloody scrape yourself.
I'm going to plug away until she says yes. But
yeah.
I've heard many people say the same thing. Yeah, put on my flak jacket before going near it. But there was a lot of action at Beitbridge. I mean, I've seen the interviews where the Parabats were involved with one Indep. And did you go out on patrols, or were you always in base camp?
I was always in base camp. We didn't have enough medics to do that. We had stick medics. Yeah. So you had guys that had some sort of training who were out there. Normally the Lance Jack would carry medical supplies. And quite a few of the guys, Don Price had the hit team, and they had a pretty good medic setup as well. But also, Tony, we were very mobile, so we, the choppers were there, and if there was a problem, we could get set up. But generally speaking, to be honest, I literally was second responder. The guys all knew what to do. They did what they'd been taught, and generally speaking, I didn't have a heck of a lot. I was picking up guys, making sure they were stable, bringing them back.
That's very impressive because, I think the training of our army was very good. We all got basic medical training. We could put a drip in and that type of thing. I just thank God I never had to do that. I came close to it once, but I didn't have to in the end. So, I take my hat off to you and other guys who had the balls to face all these horrific things and deal with them. It's not something that everybody could do, I'm sure.
Yeah. The other guy that you need to speak to is my mate Nick Ridley, and maybe even Tom, but Nick got sent out. We had some American guy got MSU, and he sent Nick out, and he's got tales to tell, and I won't know his lot.
Well, if you can pass them our way, that would be wonderful. So your time in the army sort of ended up with the engineers up near the Zambesi River. Yeah.
And very, very interesting times. It was a minefield. There was a guy called Captain Bob Cox, who, an American guy. I have a lot of respect for Bob. He used to do the graveyard shift on the radio every night. And basically he was a pretty respected engineer. He knew a lot. The troops we worked with there they weren't my troops. They weren't the guys that I'd been with. So there was a bit of settling in to do with them. And we could also, I'd had the elections. We knew that the war was sort of coming to an end. And actually, amongst the things that were starting to happen is that we knew that there were a lot of guys across in Zambia, and but the sort of regulars and the sort of much higher than us, us treaties. I'll talk a couple of stories first about that, and then I'll get onto it towards the end. But one of the guys I worked with is a guy called John English, and he actually was at university with me. Really, really interesting guy. And we spent our time talking about things like Sylvania, which is that floating weed that you in the Zambesi. But what we do is every day we'd actually go from Masuna Mouth to Binga and patrol the river, and then come back. And it was they wanted us to have a known presence, so we did it during the day so that they could actually see that we were active. One of the sad things that happened there is an elephant walked into the minefield and blew itself to pieces, but not dead. And we thought we'd put it out. And we tried to shoot it with just 7.62 rounds. And we used an MAG, we used everything. They're not easy to kill. And it was a very, very sad affair trying to kill that elephant. And eventually we did, but just by force of arms. Then the war was kind of winding down, and they had a date for the ceasefire, and it more or less coincided with when I was standing down anyway. And the last couple of weeks, we were taking call signs out of Zambia, and it was I had no concept that the Rhodesian army had so many guys, but we were going to and from, bringing guys out from the RAR, from RLI, I guess SAS, I guess the Viscount. We didn't talk a hell of a lot, and one kind of interesting thing that happened there was we were just dropping some guys off, and as they were about to run up the gorge, this bloody great crocodile came shooting down this path, and one of the engineer troopies, sappers, started cocking his MAG, and I was actually more scared of this guy getting a runaway gun up my backside than I was of this crocodile. But the bloody crocodile had a go at us, and we were trying to sort of smack it away with a paddle. Anyway, we kind of got revenge on that crocodile at the end of the last day. We actually were going into a little river into Zambia, and we were sort of chumming it with a bit of mosses. And on our last day, we took these bunker bombs because we figured we had no more use for them. We dropped them in, and there was this mega bang. And the first thing that happened, Tony, there was a school of hippo sort of close to us, and these guys came up and they kind of, it affected their ears. They were not happy hippos. And the other thing is that heaps of tigerfish floated, and we were sort of scooping these into the boat. And after my national service, I didn't wear shoes. And when these things started coming around, they were sort of snapping around my ankles, and I was trying to sort of stab them with a screwdriver. And as we came out of this river in Zambia, this bloody bull hippo decided to have a go at us. And I didn't know that hippo could move so fast. Mm-hmm. And this thing did sort of like, butterfly stroke over the water. And you could see the look in his eye. It was just like, you could see he had malice of forethought. He wasn't happy with us. We borrowed the peace boat to do this, which had some twin evidence, and we managed to get past this guy. So we took all these fish along to the Masuna Mouth Hotel, which had a very, very nice lady. I can't remember her name around. And she cooked up, I don't know if you know, but tigerfish make terrible fish eating, but they can make very nice fish cakes. So we had this. And I have no idea of the origin of this, but we managed to find a bottle of Chivas Regal. And, there was the sun setting over the Zambesi, and drinking a Chivas Regal and having some tigerfish freshly caught. And that was my last day, my second last day in the army, because I still had to get back to barracks. So Tony, that was the last day. So then we headed off, and we stopped at Guarava Hotel because we had to, it was rite of passage. And we got in there, and there were a whole lot of guys there wearing engineer belts, same as ours, and the same as the guys I was with, because I was back in medic belts, and these guys were not chatty, and they had black eyes, and they had scrapes and things, and apparently they had sort of happened to mention to a Rhodesian call sign that we'd lost the war, and they thought they'd just sort of let them take something back to Australia just to remember us by, toughen them up a little bit. But also in the pub there were these really, really big, tall guys, black guys, and they were immaculate. It turned out really, really good-looking guys. And we went over, and they had this sort of blue badge with sort of like a yellow trident on it. And we said, "Hey, where are you guys from?" And they said, "Hey, we're from Barbados, man." We said, "Barbados? Hey, yeah, West Indies, cricket. You guys play cricket?" And Tony, that is it. Hey? It was just like that is the end of the war. We started chatting to these Barbados men about cricket, and that is it. Hey, and it was just like had this huge, huge, huge relief. That is it. We were back in the real world, and it was so nice. And yeah, Tony. So
it's funny. It's funny how the war ended for many of us. I mean, I don't even remember handing my weapon in or my uniform. I just think I did it one day, and that was it. I walked out the gate, and
yeah. I can't even remember if I handed mine in at Llewellyn or Brady.
Yeah.
I had a hell of a lot of ordnance left at home. I had like a couple of thousand rounds of ammunition and bloody hand grenades and all sorts of kit, which I went and dumped in the Zambesi.
And the irony is that when the battles of Bulawayo came along, the Intimbani 1 and 2 battles, which I've just done an audio talk on and will be presented fairly soon, it was fought by, yes, some ex-RAR guys and so on, but territorials came along and stuck their necks out to fight in that, which really blew me away. And
Yeah.
the last intake of national servicemen were involved in that as well. Crazy how it all ended. I know I actually left the army and joined the police, and where I was based somewhere in Salisbury as a rapid reaction unit, as soon as we heard that the Mugabe had won, a couple of guys literally threw their weapons out the window, took off their webbing, threw it out, and just got in their cars and drove away. That's how it ended. It was just not almost like an Afghanistan under Biden just collapsed.
Yeah. That fizzled out, and that was kind of interesting. I mean, we stayed in Zimbabwe for another 20 years. Left in 2002. I mean, we've got 4 lovely daughters, beautiful daughters, and my wife, she puts up with a lot of crap. And now we've moved to Australia, and they're all settled here, and they're getting on with their lives. And as I said, Tony, I think I said to you earlier, we kind of lost our country, but we gained the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're part of us anywhere. And I mean, this Saturday I'm going to Ethiopia, and the war clouds are gathering there. Somalia is having a hassle with Ethiopia because Ethiopia is trying to cleave Somaliland off so they can get another port. And the Egyptians have delivered weapons to Mogadishu. And yeah, Tony, it's like going home. So it's cool. Something else to do. But it's a magnificent. Ethiopia is a magnificent country, and in my working life, I've traveled. I mean, this year I've been to Africa 5 or 6 times.
I believe. Have you been to southern Sudan, the southern half of it? I believe it's magnificent.
It is, but I was very close to the border in April. I was about 10 k's from the border. I'm a little bit hesitant to go there. There's a lot of oil being found in the place. It's very, very rich.
Oh.
But my main interest is wildlife. They've got this migration that comes through from South Sudan into a game park called Gambela, which is a mega game park in Ethiopia. And the migration is bigger than you get in Kenya. And so I've been trying to sort of get into that. A lot of the guys that I work with in Ethiopia have been to South Sudan, and they tell me that you just go along there, you just act like a local, and they let you alone. But it's okay, but if you're color coded, you've got a bit of a problem. And I said that to them, and they think, well, they said to me, well, yeah, you get a lot of guys working in the oil fields anyway. You won't be out of place. So Tony, it is somewhere I do want to go. And as I say, I was very, very close to the border. In fact, the picture behind you was very close to what I saw. I came across a herd of elephants.
Yeah.
And very, very nice to see elephants in that part of the world.
How come that vast amount of animals has survived? Do you think that will be put in the pot by now?
You think so, but I think it's because, well, one of the things that really protects them is the fact there's no roads and there's lots of swamps and lots of malaria and things like that. So I think it's kind of difficult to get around. And also we talk about vast areas, so huge areas with no roads, and that's one of the problems about going to go and see this. So, I mean, from the Ethiopian side, if you can catch the migration, because they don't always come at the same time. It's normally about April, but you've got to basically be there and then have your guys ready and say, let's go. And then you've only got 1 or 2 roads in and 1 or 2 roads out. And I don't think, I mean, certainly as far as the Ethiopians are concerned, they have no concept of how many animals they've got. And I've come, just driving down the main drag, I've come across lion. I've seen Abyssinian wolves, and they reckon they've only got 2,000 elephants, and yet I see them. And in a country that big to see, there must be more.
Yeah.
So part of what I'm going to be doing next week is mostly with the IFC, but I will be talking to some guys on wildlife in the country, and to see if there's something we can do. I mean, I would love to get a group of guys together to kind of look at this migration. And it's possible, and it's not that expensive.
Have you worked with Alan Savory?
I have done. I've followed his work quite a lot. I've met the guy a couple of times. So my great grandparents had a place in Det, just outside Wangi Game Reserve. In early 70s or something, they nationalised those farms and put them into Wangi Game Reserve. And basically, my great grandparents couldn't make a go of it because they were taken up by lions if they had cattle, and baboons ate every crop. And also, I think they also owned a hotel in Victoria Falls and spent a lot of time there with frivolities.
Mm.
But I understand that Alan's farm was sort of pretty much adjacent to where that was. And I've got a lot of respect for the guy. And in the work I do now, I actually use his holistic management quite a lot.
Mm.
It's a very good system. So I definitely use it.
My last question, you saw things that could upset some people. Have you had any PTSD problems in your life? Anything that you've recognized as a symptom of that?
Tony, I don't think so. I mean, talking to you is probably a symptom of PTSD. I don't want to lose this. And my children aren't hell of interested. I suppose they are interested. I'm just not a hell of interested in talking about it too much, because I believe that life moves on. And I don't think so. But I have actually spoken to a couple of guys who definitely have had some problems. And interestingly, the RSL, Return Servicemen League club here in Australia, is fairly sympathetic to Rhodesian soldiers. And I've been to a couple of meetings with them where Rhodesian soldiers have been there and been very, very welcome. And I don't think they do it officially, but I think they've been giving support because they're fabulously wealthy. I mean, they've got casinos and all sorts of amazing things and food halls and that. So the RSL club here is funded by the government, but in any event, have a huge income as well. So I think they're suffering from Dutch disease, and I think they sometimes help out guys who are in dire need, not necessarily financially, but also from a PTSD side of things.
I think
I'm not sure if the Moth Club does that in the UK.
I'm not aware of that, but I think a lot of guys don't actually, and women who've been exposed to things, even on farms, etc., they don't know that they're suffering from it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not suffering from PTSD. I didn't see anything to talk about, but I noticed that, and I've said this before, I hope I'm not boring people, that I've always been unable to sit in the middle of a restaurant. I've had to go to the edge and have my back to the wall. And I read that that's a symptom of it. But I didn't know, I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
And you might
be... that is just an inherent anti-socialism, maybe it's nothing to do with the war, it's just what you are.
Yeah,
I don't. I mean, look, after the war, it was always like I was with my rifle. But that was, but also, Tony, I mean, I've lived a very busy life. I've traveled a lot, and I haven't really. I think also quite a few people, maybe we're struggling to find it back into civilian life after the war.
Yeah.
But I was immediately. I had a job with government. I mean, my first job was in Coffee Research Station in Binga. In Tombi, Mugabe was my boss, and she thinks I saved her life. So that's Mugabe's younger sister, and she's quite a nice lady.
Wow.
And I get on fine. And so I think I got back into things quite quickly. And I think also I had no one directly associated with me who was killed. I mean, okay, buddies of mine did, but there are obviously guys who are in Harare who are injured and stuck there. And there's some really, really good guys there.
Well, Barry Zoratin did an excellent talk on episode 119. I'm sure it's 119 or 109. I think it is 119, where he spoke about PTSD, and he's become quite an authority in it and talks on it at large in America. He made a comment that I found interesting, that he said every Rhodesian is suffering from PTSD because there's no closure. We're all just left. There's no closure to the event. It might be closure in our lives individually, but corporately, there wasn't a closure. It just died, and that's not a closure, really. But it'll be interesting for you to look at that video. I think a lot of people feel that they haven't got anything to say, but every story is part of that tapestry that we're trying to put together for our history. So thanks for doing that, and may encourage all of our viewers to please subscribe, because that does help our algorithms. All right, Peter, thank you very much for your story, and all the very best for you.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Jane.
Take care.
Bye-bye.